Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim Horton and I'm the Chief Economist here at the Regional Australia Institute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I'm broadcasting from today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd like to welcome any First Nations people joining us today. Today is our 7th and final Regions Rising webinar event for this year. We have a two-part program in our first virtual summit. In this first half, we're going to hear first from Professor Andrew Beer, who will take us through his latest research on economic specialisation and diversification in Australia's mid-sized towns. We're launching Andrew's team's report today, and he will guide us through the main findings and implications for regional leaders. In the second part of this morning's session, after a short break, we're delighted to host the Minister for Regional Development, Regional Health, Regional Communications and Local Government, the Honourable Mark Colton, with an exciting announcement, along with David Robertson, the Head of Economic and Market Research at Bendigo Bank, and Gavin Williams, NBN's Chief Development Officer, Regional and Remote, to tell us about their latest program for lifting regional Australia's business performance. Joining Andrew today is Susie Bauer, who's the CEO of Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone in Tasmania, a great example of a cluster of specialised energy and manufacturing businesses that have really come together to pool their skills and resources and build a solid foundation for the Bell Bay and Georgetown communities. Susie will share with us why the businesses came together and what they are achieving. You should have received a link to view their bios in the reminder emails from Zoom. This session is being recorded and we'll be making it available later online, along with the slides from our presenters. We're also streaming to YouTube Live for those that can't access Zoom. There are some media on the line today as well. Also, please remember to get vocal on social media using the hashtag Regions Rising, and you can tag us on Twitter at RegionalAus. Before we get into it, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank our Regions Rising National Series sponsor, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, and their charitable arm, the Community Enterprise Foundation. Without them, we would not be able to continue delivering these free webinars, which I think have been really valuable in keeping us connected. I'm looking forward to hearing from the bank's David Robertson in our second session today, as he has some fascinating insights on the state of the economy nationally. So thank you to Bendigo and Adelaide Bank for their continued support and commitment to regional communities. Today, we will have time for Q&A after our guests speak. You can submit your questions at any time through the session using the Q&A function in Zoom. Make sure to write your organisation, where you're from and who you're directing your question to, if anyone. If your question is chosen, my team here will enable your microphone so you can ask it personally. I just want to put Andrew's presentation in a little bit of context. This research work was done last year as part of our Intergovernmental Shared Inquiry Program of issues into issues of importance in regional development in Australia. It was part of the research program on mid-sized towns. Last year, the Institute, through the research program, took a deep dive into Australia's mid-sized towns to complement work we'd done earlier on small towns and on our regional cities. There are over 180 mid-sized towns in Australia, which have populations between 5,000 and 50,000 people. The Institute considers under 5,000 as a small town and over 50,000 as a regional city. Mid-sized towns are a very important part of regional Australia, and the issue of diversification or specialisation is a critical one for the leaders in these towns. While the topic sounds like quite a mouthful, we're addressing a question that facing most of you as regional leaders. What's the best way for my community to build economic resilience? There's a very common thread in our discussions at the moment around the desire to diversify, to try and avoid the perils of another drought, a bushfire, or a COVID-induced stoppage of visitors. This research, Andrew's research, shows us all what's actually happened in Australia's mid-sized towns over the last decade. It shows us which types of towns have grown along each pathway, diversification or specialisation, or a mix of both. And it has some very clear findings and implications, showing the types of places that should be thinking about one path more than another. Importantly, it also shows us how the pathways need to be different for different places. So a national industry-wide transition strategy such as we had with textiles, clothing and footwear and the automotive industry, is no longer the right recipe. Our economic transition support needs to be able to vary from place to place. We need genuine place-based policies and programs which enable towns to work on their own pathway and which enable this pathway to look different from place to place. Andrew led this research for us as part of our Regional Research Connections program, which is a partnership we have with UniSA, Charles Darwin University and RMIT to help us carry out our research program. I'd now like to warmly welcome Professor Andrew Beer to give his keynote address on our latest research, which you can now find on our website. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Kim, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak today. As I address this topic, I'm mindful of the contributions made by my collaborators on this project, and I'm also mindful of the contributions made by many others who participate in the project, including economic development practitioners. Because today we're looking at a long-term issue in terms of understanding the economics of places, the economics of nations, and the economics of regions. The world is a very big place, as we know, and there are many economists and many researchers who have written on the topic of specialisation versus diversification. And it's important to reflect upon that. It was the 18th century economist, David Ricardo, who was the first to argue that places, specifically nations, need to specialise their economies in order to drive productivity. Indeed, a lot of our economic strategy as nations today, including the opening up of borders, is based on that fundamental insight derived from Ricardo's work on textile production in 18th century Britain and wine production in 18th century Portugal. But as with all ideas, these are contested. In the 1970s, Nobel laureate Simon Kuznets argued that a country's economic growth may be defined as a long-term rise in the capacity to supply increasingly diverse economic goods to its population. And if we could move to the next slide, please, Nina. So he argued, contrary to David Ricardo's views, he argued that in fact, economic development was associated with an increasingly diversified economy, not a specialised one. More recent work, however, suggests that it's actually a U-shaped curve. If we start off from a base condition, economies tend to be heavily specialised. As they develop and as per capita incomes rise, they become more diversified, and then they rise again as they become specialised again. That's a fascinating insight, I think, but it's an insight that really relates to nations as a whole. And the reality is, mid-sized towns in Australia, regional cities in Europe, etc., aren't economies of the same nature and complexity as nations. So this is an issue that remains really live in terms of academic debate. In terms of what people argue, often people argue that there are important impacts in terms of whether an economy is it needs to be diversified or specialised. Some people argue that there's an impact on resilience. It's argued that places need diversified economies in order to be resilient. This line of argument suggests that if you depend on one or two industries alone, what you find is if there's a shock into that industry for whatever reason, drought, change in terms of trade, labour force issues, etc., all of a sudden that industry declines and the place suffers an enormous shock. The argument is you need a diversified economy so you don't get locked in to one industry or employer. And bigger centres actually have an advantage, it's argued, because larger urban centres are naturally much more diversified because they simply have more people, more jobs, more employers. There's a contrary argument, of course, because this is academic life we're talking about and policy development. It's often argued that there's a productivity benefit, and the productivity benefit is associated with specialisation. So if a place specialises in one or a few industries, they become more productive they become more efficient, they become better able to produce that good, and they become more resilient over time, and they become much more economically prosperous. And fundamentally, Michael Porter's ideas around industry clusters and many of the other ideas that we commonly subscribe to in economic development globally are associated with this insight. The key point being, do one or two things well and grow. There's also a question around sustainability. It's increasingly argued that as we look at a climate change affected world, as we begin to question the carbon footprint of activity, that if we have diversified local economies, they're going to be more sustainable because goods are going to be obtained locally and the carbon footprint will be lowered on those activities. Diversification can also add to social sustainability by creating opportunity for existing businesses, including farms, to have a portfolio of activities that they can make use of to sustain their incomes. So if you're a grains farmer, but you also run, for example, a farm stay accommodation, you're a more sustainable enterprise, you have a better future in the medium and long term because you're not relying on one income stream. A fourth perspective argues around dynamism at the local scale. So it's argued that in diversified economies, you're more likely to see entrepreneurs arise, because in diversified economy, there are lots of niches, if you like, lots of little bits where people with great ideas can develop those ideas and begin to exploit them. Whereas in much more specialised economies, there is only one industry. They might be efficient and productive in that industry, but people who want to innovate in, let's say, tourism and leisure services might find few opportunities available to them in a coal mining town or in a grain producing town, etc. So it's argued that there's more dynamism in the economy if it's a diversified economy because there's more opportunities for green shoots to sprout. And the final argument around this line of thinking is that there's an issue around inequality. So some have argued that in highly specialised economies, labour market outcomes tend to be more unequal or unfair because there are fewer opportunities for people. That is, if you don't find employment in a major industry, you often don't find employment. And mining industries might be, mining towns, mining centres might be a good example of that, where historically, if you didn't meet the profile they were looking for a miner, you didn't find employment and there were fewer other opportunities available to you. So this is a hot issue. This is an issue that remains open to debate amongst policymakers and remains open to debate amongst academics and practitioners. And to be honest, this is an issue that does actually inform a bucket load of the policies and economic thinking that we see across Australia, across the European Union, and across other parts of the developed and developing world. What do we do? Do we become more specialised or do we become more diversified? So now I want to turn to talk about our work. So our work was undertaken using the 2016 census. And we examined about 180 urban centres of the population 5,000 to 50,000 across Australia. We used the 2016 census boundaries and we looked at three key determinants or indicators of whether a place is growing or not growing. We looked at population change, we looked at labour force change, and we looked at change in wages as a measure of economic value in the economy. And we did this quantitative work in two stages. Stage one looked at the economy of these towns in total, while stage two broke it down by industry. So I'm now going to give you, if you like, the headline findings, which I think have been made available by the Regional Australia Institute, and I thank them for that. So overall, the analysis with the urban system and the ways in which industry structure and local conditions shape growth leads to a number of what I refer to as headline conclusions. And these are the 4 or 5 or 6 points that I would offer up to practitioners and policymakers if they're the only thing they're going to concentrate on. So the first thing is to acknowledge broader context. So the performance of urban centres clearly varies over time in line with broader economic conditions, including, in the case of the mining industry, global demand for mineral resources. So clearly, broader economic conditions have an enormous impact on the well-being of the places we're talking about. So that is, in many respects, an evident point, but one we shouldn't lose sight of. Secondly, the available evidence suggests that mid-sized towns with a population of 10,000 to 50,000 were more likely to experience strong growth if they were specialised economies and becoming more specialised over time. So there are two components to that. We'll come on to the next slide from the person who asked for it in just a second. So the key point here is that it's about being specialised, and becoming more specialised over time was the greatest predictor of growth. So it wasn't just about whether you're diversified or specialised, but whether you were specialised and becoming more specialised. Thirdly, we found that diversification of the economy may be more important in smaller mid-sized towns, such as those with a population less than 10,000, as it reduced the risks associated with being smaller. Fourthly, a more specialised economy is likely to generate stronger economic growth and higher per capita incomes in a population of 10,000 or more, but is likely to generate fewer jobs than a diversified economic base of the same population level for the same level of economic activity. And that sounds like a mouthful, but what it's really saying is that for a given size centre above 10,000, if you have a diversified economic base, your economy is less efficient, so you need more people to do the same amount of work than if you had a specialised economy and you're more efficient at that work. This, of course, then raises questions which we might come on to later about what the goals are in terms of growth. Are the goals of growth about producing more jobs, or are the goals of growth about producing higher incomes and or a more resilient economic structure? It's an eternal question in this field, and it's one we could touch on today if we want to. Fifth, it's important to acknowledge the industries or sector a town has strength in has a large impact on growth rates. Put simply, places with fast growth rates grow more quickly compared to those that are specialised in slow-growing industries. The bottom line is it's good to be concentrated in fast-growing industries compared to slow-growing industries. If we could then move on to the next slide, please, Nina. So in the next stage, we used econometric analysis to examine how growth has varied across mid-sized towns over the years 2006, 2011 and 2016. We controlled for the influence of several variables such as population density, location and access to human capital, and we came up with some findings. Specialisation has a positive effect on population and labour force size, but a negative effect on wages. Diversification has a negative effect on wages overall, and moving to related industries, what we call related variety, but are really industries similar to the industries that you've already got, has a positive effect on population and labour force size. So in many respects, what we find is it's not a really simple dualism between specialise or diversify. It's about building on your strengths is the real question. And in the figure that's now presented on the slide deck, what you see is that some industries get best benefit if, in fact, growth takes place in industries that are similar to the ones they're already specialised in, but not exactly the same. So, for example, if you take manufacturing, further specialisation in manufacturing is beneficial, but you also see a beneficial impact if you move into related fields such as energy generation or transport, for example, as a benefit. So these are some of the ways in which we can see benefit over time. Actually, I'll come back to that later. So specialisation can benefit local economies that are dependent on manufacturing, transport, or education. Moving to very different industries can insulate local economies that depend on sectors especially prone to volatility, such as mining and manufacturing. And moving to similar sorts of industries are particularly good for industries such as those that are service industries, including tourism, retailing, or education. Another part of what we did was look at what happens on the ground. And we talked to economic development practitioners. And what we often found when we talked to economic development practitioners is that they argued that specialisation or diversification wasn't necessarily a goal in and of itself, but instead it was an outcome of increased economic growth. And I think that was a really important point. The other point they made was that they felt that in terms of guiding growth, these are decisions that need to be made at the very local level. And that's an important insight as well, because only they know where the opportunities lie. If we could move on to the next slide, thank you. I just want to give some examples as I finish up. So this is Whyalla, South Australia, not too far from where I live. Whyalla has been a town that has been in decline since the mid-1970s, but from 2017, it's argued that it's been in a process of transition to a more prosperous future. People have suggested very substantial population growth for Whyalla. Part of this transition was the buyout by Sanjeev Gupta in 2017 and a program of reinvestment into the steelworks and associated industries. But when we think about that process, and the process remains happening and it remains somewhat challenged at this stage, but when we think about the transition Whyalla is going through, what we see is a couple of things. One is Gupta's buyout of the Whyalla Steelworks brought with it connection to global industries. Gupta's group, GFG Alliance, Liberty House, is now the third largest steel producer in Europe. Global networks bring advantages in terms of specialisations, efficiency and productivity, etc. One key component of the changes that are taking place in Whyalla is an increase in the production of renewable energy, a process that Gupta was heavily involved in, though has now moved away from that part of the restructure. Now, why is renewable energy important? Renewable energy is important because in this instance, 1/3 of the cost of steel production is actually made up in electricity costs. So if you need to control your cost to boost productivity, which of course you should do, making this sort of transition is very important. So this transition makes use of abundant natural resources, sunshine, human infrastructure, electricity transmission capacity, and inexpensive land to move to what could be and should be a more productive future. So it's a good example of what we refer to as related variety. If we move on, if we look at Mount Gambier now. Next slide, please, Nina. If we look at Mount Gambier now, beautiful part of the world. I've just holidayed there not too far in the distant past. It's an important regional centre, now South Australia's largest city, but it's a place with very low rates of population growth and has a very mixed industrial structure. It is a very diversified economy. It has retail, community services, health services, government services, some tourism and some transport. So if you think about Mount Gambier, the question we would ask based on the work we've done today is, or presented today is, well, where should they go? What should they be doing? On balance, they should be looking to specialise and concentrate their resources in growing one or two industries. But which industry to move to? What infrastructure should they redeploy to get growth to happen? Well, we've already identified that service industries benefit from both of different but related industries. And as Mount Gambier is already a service industry town, potential candidates would include those parts of the economy which are already tied to global and national markets and are part of the service sector. So education and tourism, to my mind, would seem to be the most likely outcomes or the most productive outcomes in terms of a refocusing of the economic development efforts. And if we move on to the next slide, please, Nina. Finally, we take the example of Hay, New South Wales. Now, Hay is not technically a mid-sized town, but they did drop into the webinar with economic development practitioners, so I think it's legitimate to talk about them. Hay has been a town of population loss, but it's now a town that has achieved stable population as a result of employment growth. And when you talk to the economic development practitioner there, they talk about diversification. They diversified their economy. They've become much more diversified in what they do. But in detail, what they've done is they've moved out of pastoral activities alone into things such as cotton and some irrigated annual crops. They're also investigating other crops that they could move into, including those based on trees, including fruit, for example. But when we think about it in the terms of the analysis that we took, this is really a story of specialisation. It's a story of further specialisation in agriculture and the transfer and reuse of skills already developed in primary industries to further the town's growth, using exactly the same resources and infrastructure they've always had in the region. So to move on, in conclusion, it's important to acknowledge that every place is different and every place has its own set of opportunities and risks. There is no one-size-fits-all solution out of this research. There never was going to be. But the analysis is clear. Mid-sized towns are likely to have a better future if they specialise, and most importantly, if they build on their strengths. That's a clear outcome. It should inform economic development strategies across regional Australia. A manufacturing town that moves to energy generation or the transport sector makes sense. Attempting to become a tourism centre simply does not. Specialisation does carry risks, especially in volatile, trade-exposed industries such as mining. But in the long term, specialisation produces a more robust and productive economy, more likely to see out the low points in the economic cycle while benefiting from the high points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Great summary. And I think if you've been following the chat, we've just included the link there now to a summary of the paper too that Nina has prepared for us, which picks up on many of the things that Andrew was talking about earlier on, those 6 key points and some of those overall impacts on labour and workforce and wages. So that's there for you to look at through as well. It's now thank you very much, Andrew. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Susie Bauer. Susie is the CEO of the Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone, which I think is a very interesting and inspirational example of a local industry cluster that's determined to keep building on its specialisations for the benefit of the community around it. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So I'll just share my screen. So we're a little bit, when I first started in this role, we would probably be looking very much at a diversification strategy. But now we're in a renewable energy phase. We're also looking at a specialisation strategy as well. So it's interesting. We're a little bit of both. And you're quite right, Andrew. It's horses for courses, really, isn't it? Depending on what community you actually live in. So just to give you a little bit of background about Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone. So we're in Tasmania. We're in the northeast corner of Tasmania in a town called Georgetown. That has a population of around 7,000 people. We are located about 40 kilometres from Launceston, which then has a population of just around, including the outskirts, around 100,000. So we're not far, and it's, of course, because we're an industrial site, mainly, and it has been there for 65 years as an industrial site at Georgetown, or Bell Bay, which is about 2 k's out of Georgetown. The roadwork network is very good between Launceston and Georgetown. So the reason that this group was actually formed, so we have, and I'll go into some of the businesses that we have in our membership base, but two of the big ones are Bell Bay Aluminium, which is actually owned by Rio Tinto, and that employs around 500 people. And obviously, as the name suggests, they produce aluminium. We also have another company called Temco, which is currently in transition. So Mr. Gupta, who is part of WOW, has just bought Temco, and they employ around 300 people, and they produce manganese. So, and then our third largest employer is Timberlink, obviously in the forestry area, and they're 180 FTEs. So with those three, it's quite a large representation of over half of the FTEs that I represent and the businesses I represent. So back in 2015, as with any of those large corporations that rely on global economies and global pricing, you never know whether they're safe. So Rio, at one time, there was going to be a closure of Bell Bay Aluminium. And this sort of sparked the general manager of Rio at the time, or the Bell Bay Aluminium plant, to say, well, my goodness, we've been here at that stage for just under 58 years. What is our legacy to our community and to the Georgetown community if we were to close? And this got everyone thinking, and an economic development group formed in 2015. And it was basically just an expression of interest was put out to every business in the Bell Bay area. And 12 put their hand up and said, look, we want to be involved in a collaborative model of what can we actually do to diversify our businesses and make sure that if the worst case scenario does happen and Rio or Bell Bay do close, that we can actually still manage and still exist. So because most of these businesses have developed off the curtails of those larger corporations, and they've also been there for 30 or 40 years as part of that supply chain. So the group formed in 2015. It wasn't very long after they formed it, they realised they've all got full-time jobs. So a lot of their brilliant ideas they couldn't actually implement. So they looked at the idea of putting in a paid position. Now, they approached the Tasmanian government for a paid position, and the proviso back from the government was, we'll put our hand in our pocket if industry put a hand in their pocket and actually be part of the solution as well. So it was actually a combination of a paid position that was actually a third paid by industry, a third by the state government, and a third by the local government area of Georgetown. The project officer, which happened to be me at the time, was appointed in 2017, and I worked up to 22 hours per week for a couple of years. This year I've actually gone full time, and we've also now just become a company, and I'll talk about that in a little bit because we've actually done that through a COVID environment, which shows the confidence of the business and the area of Georgetown in our future. So if I give you a look at the motley crew, there's some of our CEOs. One thing that was extremely important to us when we have our membership base is that we are represented by our members either at the CEO level or at a director level, so that the decisions can actually be made. So when we come together for meetings and when we want to look at projects, we can actually make some of these decisions. So as you can see, there's still a little bit of a skew there towards a male dominated area there. We only have one female CEO at the moment, but that is changing and starting to, again, it's a very traditional area. So if we look at those companies there, you'll see the first three I mentioned, which pretty much have the majority of the FTEs. And then we have very small and medium companies after that, that make up some of the businesses that I represent. They are a mixture of engineering companies, electrical companies, construction companies, etc. Then the government part, I guess, is where we have our other membership. So we have the Coordinator General for Tasmania represented on our committee. We have representation from Georgetown Council, City of Launceston and West Tamar Council, and I'll explain why it's important that those three councils are actually part of our membership base. We have the Regional Development Australia Tasmania, we have Georgetown Chamber of Commerce, and we have Tas Ports and Tas Rails as part of our structure as well. If we look at some of the facts around Bell Bay, so in Tasmania, 59% of all Tasmania's manufactured exports are actually out of the Bell Bay area. And approximately all those businesses that I indicated, I exclude the government entities, but the businesses are around 1,300 FTEs in those 16 businesses. And why are those three municipalities important to us? Because essentially that's where the people live. So the people that work at Bell Bay, actually a third live in Georgetown, a third live in the West Tamar area, and a third live in Launceston. So it's important for those economies that we have that alignment, I guess, of what's happening in Bell Bay, because it's all very important to those other municipalities as well for their survival. So what have we actually managed to achieve in the last couple of years? And I'll just pick out a couple of these projects. So one of the main things that we looked at to start with was around joint procurement. And we looked at many things. So we looked at fleet, we looked at PPE gear, we looked at flights, and we looked at training. The only one that I could get any agreement from all of those businesses was around the training element. So PPE was just too hard. There were too many suppliers in the market. They had too many, long-term relationships, etc. So that was a no-go. Fleet was all over the shop. Some leased, some bought, some changed over after 3 years. Some never changed over until the car died or the vehicle died. So again, a little bit difficult to manage that one. But the one thing that came through very clear was your basic training. So, you're working at heights, working in confined spaces, CPR, first aid training. So we actually did an expression of interest out to providers, and we looked at, and we now have a preferred provider in regards to that basic training. That actually affords, because of our critical mass of the area, a 33% discount in training. And for a lot of our members, and even our top level members, that actually, just that one initiative actually pays for their membership to be part of Bell Bay Advanced Manufacturing Zone. So they've already, getting their money back, and that value proposition. As we know these days, if there's not that value proposition, why would you join? Why would you pay? And why would you contribute? So some of those, that's very clear in that one initiative around joint procurement, that's helped with that value proposition. We went through a branding strategy, so I won't go too much into that. The next one example I'd really like to give, though, is the establishment of a brand new company. So we have the establishment of what we call KEEN, which was the Key Education and Employment Network. So Bell Bay Aluminium actually came to us as a group and said, look, we've got this problem. We need skilled labour at short notice. We go to labour hire companies and they provide us a person, but not the skill base that we need to actually do the job. And they said, through the engineering companies in particular, who we know have those skills in this group, could you actually supply those people to us when we need them? So when we have sick leave, or we have annual leave, or long service leave requirements. And we said, well, how many FTEs do you need? And they said, about 8. And we thought, there's 5 engineering groups, and we thought amongst the 5, they could actually probably manage that quite easily. But then South 32, which is Temco, said, well, actually, we could actually utilise something like that as well. And then Timberlink with 180, they said we could as well. So we kind of went, it's probably a little bit more than 8 FTEs. So we actually established a model, a brand new company. So those smiling faces you see there are the directors of the company, and they are also BBAMZ members. So they got together and formed a brand new company. Now, something interesting about 3 of the 5 there is they're also direct competitors with each other. And what they actually had to do to join this company was actually open up their financials and open up their books and combine. And if you ever work with anyone in industry, that's a tough ask to have that level of trust to happen. But that's what these guys did, because they were actually supplying Bell Bay Aluminium with labour at a different cost. Each of them were charging different charges, and they had to come together and form that one size fits all, I guess, for this new company. So we actually managed to secure the ex-general manager of Bell Bay Aluminium as the CEO of KEEN, and he actually became the 6th. He loved the model so much, he actually became the 6th director after he became the CEO. So something that's probably a little bit different. I mean, everyone knows how a GTO operates, a group training organisation with apprenticeships and trainees. It allows the apprentice to actually go to many different companies as they're doing their apprenticeship, rather than just spending 4 years with one company. And it gives them a much broader range of skill sets than one, if you're just staying with one particular company. But what's unique about the labour hire component of KEEN is for most labour hire components, you're only a casual employee. With Keen, they actually have a very different model, and they actually employ you full time. And then they just, put you out to jobs. And when you're not actually out of jobs, you're actually doing training. So it's a very different model of security for our local community in particular, because as you know, if you're a casual employee, it's very hard to get a bank loan or anything like that. You need full-time employment and security of that for people to loan you money. So that's probably one of the key differences in that group. So they've started with just servicing the Georgetown area. They now have been in operation for just over a year, and they now employ 40 FTEs. So there is an example of a brand new company that was a problem was presented to BBAMZ, and we came up with a solution. So I spent 6 months setting up that company for the guys, and then handed it over to the CEO and said, on your way. He's made a great success of it since. So that's one example of another diversification, if you like, of what they were doing and utilising in the area. They've also expanded to the rest of Tasmania and not just the Georgetown area now, where they provide work. We did some Commonwealth funded employment trials for long-term youth unemployed. We did get one apprentice out of that. The interesting thing about that was the apprentice herself, without that Commonwealth funded employment trials where they actually do an internship, so they do an internship for 4 weeks. If that individual, she was 19, she wanted to be a Boilermaker welder. She had applied on numerous occasions to the traditional way of doing an apprenticeship, and she kept getting refused because her maths wasn't up to scratch. But what happened with her doing a internship was that she was able to prove all these other skill sets that she had to the employer. So she had a great work ethic. She had very good communication skills. She was a team player. And so at the end of the 4 weeks, Roger, which is pictured in there with the beard, he actually put her on and gave her the opportunity, and she is now into that apprenticeship. She's into her 2nd year. She's as happy as a pig in mud at being able to actually get on with something that she's passionate about and what she wasn't able through traditional means to actually get into that field. Although I did visit the business about 2 months ago, and I said, oh, how's Brianna going? And I was told by the business, oh, my goodness, she's not doing enough work. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And they said, oh, all the guys keep going to her for relationship advice. And I said, oh, right, well, okay, well, that's your problem, guys. So it's certainly changed the workforce and the workplace, which is, for many in, small country towns, quite traditional still in manufacturing to be quite male dominated. We have been successful with some funding. I'll go into a couple of those. And in 2019, we did win a national award for regional growth. In relation to what we've been up to this year, so as I mentioned, interestingly enough, after 2 years, we actually had moved to a board structure. Now, this decision actually came through COVID. So it's a very brave decision still that the board and the confidence that the businesses have to move to a board structure and become financially independent through COVID. And that's exactly what they've done. And we have never really gone out and sought membership, but I will be now. So we'll be on a bit of a growth strategy because we need to look at our financial sustainability. We have done some signage strategy. I'm not sure about other industrial estates around Australia, but certainly ours, you wouldn't have a clue. There's a roundabout on the main road and you turn left, and then if you go left, you'll see this great big industrial site, but if you go, you wouldn't even know it was there. You could quite easily drive past it because it's all tree lined and you can't really see it from the main road. So we're putting some signage up to actually, modify that and make sure that there is a presence and a level of pride too about what we achieve in northern Tasmania from a manufacturing base. We're looking quite a bit in the upskilling and training area. That's a lot for our, our future proofing, of our skill sets and our workforce in particular. The AFL lights at the Georgetown Ports Complex. So part of our strategic plan for BBAMZ is that we actually want to give back to the communities that we live in. as businesses. So we actually partnered with the Georgetown Council, and they received a grant. It was a $300,000 project to put these lights up. They received a grant for $200,000 from the Commonwealth, and the BBAMZ have project managed that for them and have actually put $110,000 of in-kind into actually those lights. So they've done all the footings, all the electrical work, all the installation, and they've done that free of charge for the community. And so we want to make sure that we are putting back into our communities and doing this on a regular basis. And it also perhaps challenges local government a little bit, may I say, with some procurement and different areas that we can look at, that the first word out of the general manager and the mayor's mouth at Georgetown is yes. And then they do this, like, you know, duck-like underneath, going, now how do we make that happen? So I'm very, very fortunate that I have very proactive people in local government that are wanting to work this closely with industry, and we can see what sort of benefit that can actually have for the community. This year we've been successful also in obtaining a Northern Workforce Development Facilitator position. So we have that for 3 years, and that's really around some of the hidden job market. So for Northern Tasmania, 40% of the jobs are not advertised. So this is really to look at that hidden market for people. A lot of people in Tassie, you know, if they're looking on Seek, they just won't see any jobs because they're word of mouth, they're introductions that you make. So it's a very networked place. So if you don't have those networks, you will find it extremely difficult to find the jobs sometimes that you're looking for. So we have this position in place that will help with that, and not just the manufacturing, it will also cover agriculture, tourism and hospitality, and the aged care sector. So it works over 4 different sectors. We have, I guess, an area of training and assessment qualification for industry, and this is really about growing our own. So this is about being able to train and not have to rely on other bodies to come to Georgetown to train or skill our staff. So we have this, sometimes it's quite difficult in Tasmania to get the RTO or TASTAFE to actually come out to, even though it's only 40 minutes from Launceston, come out to Georgetown to do that. So we're having a concentration now at the moment. I think we've got 4 people from Rio being trained up so that they can actually take on some of that training and assessment qualification for industry. We also started some business breakfasts. In particular, they've been quite successful for our members. So it's really just about, again, value adding for your membership base. When we look at diversification, so what actually happened last year, late 2018, was Temco was up for sale or closure or care and maintenance. And we weren't sure what was going to happen at that stage. So a lot of businesses got quite nervous again because there's, you know, quite a big supply chain that goes into Temco. And at the same time, about a month later, Bell Bay Aluminium actually changed the way that they do their tendering and their procurement. And what had been mostly, and some might be horrified by this, but they were handshake deals, for 30 years of supplying materials, now had to go through a formal process. This was quite scary for a lot of our businesses because they've never actually had to write too many tenders. Some of them had 90% reliance on either Bell Bay Aluminium or Temco for their incomes, but to manage their businesses. So we did some tender training with our businesses. We found that I don't think there was a single one that was actually what I would call tender ready. As you know, about 70% of a tender is very, you know, is basic information and stuff that you need to have for, you know, work health and safety and all of those sorts of compliance issues. And then your 30% is, you know, your pricing and all of that sort of thing that goes into different tenders. So we're able to get our businesses up to now being tender ready, what we called that. And since they've actually had that training, they've won about 4 different contracts now for tenders that are actually outside of Temco and Bell Bay Aluminium. And so they've actually really diversified through that training on where they actually gain some of their business from. A big one for us, obviously, is investment attraction. So we're fast becoming hydrogen hub, I guess, if you like. So it was only announced yesterday from the Tasmanian government that there are 2 feasibility studies that have been funded through the government, one for Origin Energy and one for Able Energy. And that's for 2 lots of 100 watt hydrogen. One will produce green hydrogen as ammonia plant, and the other is for export as well. Apart from that, so they were the 2 that were funded, but Fortescue is also looking at putting in a 250 megawatt hydrogen plant at these are all at Bell Bay. And Countrywide and Woodside, who've partnered, are also looking to set up a hydrogen plant for export next year as well. So from a specialisation point of view, this is something that we've really had to pivot to. It's brand new tech, as everyone knows, it's a brand new energy market. We're not really sure what we're doing still from a specialisation training point of view, because there is no training in this at the moment. There's no accredited training, there's non-accredited training, but nothing, and that will take 18 months to happen. But we do know that some of the skill sets that you need to work in our industry, we are able to upskill to get them where they need to be to work in the hydrogen industry. So we're now working with our existing workforce to look at those upskilling areas that they need to work in this brand new industry that's going to be quite big for Tasmania in particular. We work obviously very closely with the Coordinator General's Office for a lot of these different projects. So there's another project too at Rio. So, sorry, I keep going Rio, but Bell Bay Aluminium have a waste product called red dirt. They have about a 20-year supply of it at the back of Bell Bay Aluminium, just sitting there. There is a new company called Peloton that have actually found a use for this waste product and can make quite good money by extracting the minerals from that waste. And they are looking at setting up here in 12 months' time as well, and they'll be employing another 120. So when we look at the hydrogen future and some of the others, we have around 500 FTE jobs coming to little old northern Tasmania in Bell Bay. So my poor northern workforce development person, she only started in September, and in her first week we had 2 hydrogen proponents, and she freaked out afterwards. She said, where am I going to find all these people that we need for these future industries? But I was like, well, at least that's a good problem to have. So just a couple of take-home messages to wind up. Trust and collaboration, you know, it is something that gets flouted around a lot, I guess, but, and I won't say that it was easy to get those businesses on board. It probably took 7 months of my time for them to trust me. But by gee, now that they do, now we have that relationship, and now I have that trust with those businesses. Whatever I put up to them, they're like, yep, we're in, just tell us what we need to do. And so you know, once you've got that relationship, it is absolute gold. And what it can actually achieve for your, not only your local community, but for us, the Tasmanian community is huge. One of the other things is the importance of it being industry-led. That is why it's been so successful. It is supported by all levels of government, but government should not be leading these sorts of things. It is much more successful if it's industry-led, but supported by government. The one point of contact, that has been probably really, really handy for anyone, any proponents that are looking at developments. They come to me, I'm then able to, you know, share my networks and point them in the right direction. Who do they need to talk to at Tas Networks? Who do they need to talk to at Tas Water? Who do they need to talk to at, you know, Bell Bay Aluminium? All of those sorts of things. So that one point of contact has been extremely important. And I know if you've ever worked at a university, which I have, one of the biggest things that people keep saying is, where's the front door? You know, sometimes when you need to get into a university, who do I go and speak to? How do I engage? So that one point of contact has been critical. And I truly believe that this model is completely transferable to other industries and sectors, not just manufacturing. So yeah, I'm quite happy to take questions. So that's it for me, but I'm sure I've probably left out a lot of information because I know this pretty much backwards, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Susie. That was terrific. I have got something out of that. Andrew's team's paper talks a lot about the strategies around diversification, strategies around specialisation. We talk about, this town might like to look at increasing its depth of specialisation here, or perhaps doing some related specialisation or diversification here. I think what Susie's describing is how you actually do that in a reasonably small scale, in a reasonably small population, only 7,000 people, but with lots of important businesses there. And Susie, I might ask you a question a little later on. I think I was really interested in the notion about what got those employers together. They had been competing. Now they're collaborating, and I think there's a sort of an interesting backstory there, which I might ask you about a little bit, but lots of really good lessons there about it's the practical stuff that works, so starting those employers together, working with things that they could share, like looking at PPE, looking at car leasing, and finding that labour hire one or something that was going to give them all a return straight away. That, in a nutshell, I think is how to intervene and help to facilitate some of this sector growth. But I might come back to that to you in a minute. Andrew, I've got a question for you. Have we got Steve Harrison on the line? Steve had an interesting question about the flows between regions and cities, and the way that COVID and other things have changed the sort of attractiveness and livability of regions. Are there, Steve, are you there? Would you like to ask a question?
I'm here, Kim, if you can hear me.
Yep, hear you clearly.
Yeah, thanks for the presentations, Andrew. I'm just interested in your research that in the eventuality of COVID-19 and the 21st century technologies like Zoom that we're using now and broadband. We've seen a big shift of workers from the big cities to regional centres and small towns, and both those workers and their employers are finding that there's productivity gains, that they're more efficient, more effective. Workers suddenly get to see their family. The big commute has ended, but and they've diversified those towns because they've bought new skills and new types of jobs actually into those towns, and they're spending their money locally. But we're seeing, particularly in South Australia, that the owners of the big office towers in the CBDs, and they're backed by the government, are calling for the workers to come back to the CBDs. And I don't think the workers want to come back. And in some cases with the employers, they don't want their workers to come back either, because they've got a whole lot less office space to pay for. But I was just wondering if your research has touched upon this and how that technology has enabled the diversification of regional centres through really COVID fast-tracking this.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Steve. It's a really good one. Look, I think, our research was done before COVID-19 had shown it, but I think it does have some implications for how you read the outcomes of our research. So I think, first of all, our research is about long-term trends, and it's very hard to move long-term trends. So I think a lot of the very fundamental insights in that report still hold. And I think Susie's presentation's a really good example of that. I mean, clearly Bell Bay, Georgetown's a fantastic place for advanced manufacturing, and it will continue on its trajectory. And those sorts of workplaces will continue as they're going. I think in terms of those other workers who are perhaps more city-based, you're right, there will be an attraction to move to other parts of whatever jurisdiction they're allowed to move to. So other parts of regional South Australia, or if in New South Wales, maybe Byron Bay and Coffs Harbour. But I think that will be a moderate change in terms of where the workforce goes, because I don't think every worker can spend every day working remotely. I think what we're going to see is many office workers working a number of days every week working remotely. And so that means that probably some of the less remote parts of regional Australia will really benefit from this, because workers will still be working in less remote parts of regional Australia and coming in when they need to for 2 or 3 days a week at the most, whereas the more remote parts of regional Australia probably won't get that benefit. And of course, regional Australia will get a benefit because people who stay working at home are more likely to spend their money close to their home residence, go to shops, go to cafes and tourism activities and accommodation, etc. So there will be a benefit, but I suspect it will be a modest change rather than a wholesale change in what's happening in regional Australia.
Thanks, Andrew. I want to stick with this worker topic for a minute. We've had another couple of questions on this as well. Andrew, one of the things that's fairly clear from the study is that as specialisations deepen, they're deepening where there are strong competitive advantages, and that flows back into wages. So there's clearly a sort of a really high skilled story here for places that are doing that well. And I know, Susie, that one of the real challenges, and interesting that your industry group, one of the first things they did was get together and solve a labour shortage challenge that they have. Now, we know that there are I think there are 50,000 jobs currently vacant in regional Australia. Most of those that are highly skilled trades and professions. Big challenge for regions, particularly those that are needing specialised workers, is how to get them, how to keep them, how to retain them. Susie, is that something that's on the minds of your members? We just got to, hang on, Susie. Hang on. Susie, you're on mute. We're trying to, there we go.
Sorry, I got muted. Not for the larger players. I guess, you know, they're very well paid and there are many opportunities for them within those groups. So, you know, Rio, for example, is a huge conglomerate right around the world. So the opportunities to move around positions and things like that, you know, is there. For our smaller companies, so our small to medium, yeah, this is a challenge. This is a big challenge. So when we're looking at that 60 FTE and below, it is certainly a challenge to keep the more specialised roles. And increasingly, though, we do need those roles. You know, CPT engineering, for example, they use actually robots to do all their welding. And so, you know, they need that expertise now compared to what would have been more a traditional, you know, rather than having a boilermaker welder trade, for example. So it's more the technical skills, the technology skills they need than the technical skills. So, yeah, so smaller businesses, yes, but the larger ones, no.
Andrew, have you seen this in any of those case study areas? Is there a challenge for, you know, being able to actually increase the skills component of your specialisation from a regional setting, particularly one that may not be, you know, particularly attractive from a livability point of view?
Yeah, I think there are obviously shortages, and I know places like Wales sometimes report significant shortages. Ironically, as they're moving towards clean energy production on quite a substantial scale, they're actually having trouble attracting skilled workers into that industry, basically installing solar panels, because ultimately an electrician has to sign off on it, and they're having trouble attract sufficient numbers. And I guess that's the thing about specialisation in regional Australia. There are advantages for the firm, and one of those advantages for the firm is, of course, over time, a workforce establishes that is relevant to their industry, is relevant to their enterprise. And they might share that workforce with a number of other employers, and that's a really good thing, because as one grows, the other one can contract without losing the capacity regionally.
Yeah, that's right, and that's part of building that sort of critical horsepower, isn't it? We had a question here from Jacqueline Fellows about some of the other factors, Andrew, that might be buried in the research. Jacqueline, could you ask? Are you there? Can you ask your question?
Yes, thanks so much, Kim. Hi, everyone. Going back to your last slide from your presentation, Andrew, you spoke, there was a reference to other factors that could be considered the primary determinants of growth, particularly for industries of agriculture, retail, public administration, and healthcare and social assistance. I'm just wondering if you can speak to what those other factors might be. I'm wondering whether industry engagement has a role to play in those other factors, and whether those other factors could be even further specified between regions.
Yeah, obviously every place, I mean, we looked at 180 individual places in terms of the study, and they all have their own trajectory. But some of the things that also determine growth rate include things such as government sector investment can obviously be a lead factor in terms of encouraging growth and should never be underestimated. I think the resource base of a region is really important. Now, if we think about Susie's presentation, I think one of the reasons Bell Bay has been so successful and was initially established is access to relatively cheap hydroelectricity was a key factor. So those resource endowments clearly contribute to and shape the growth path that places are able to follow or track on. And that's why place-based approaches are really so important in terms of any conversation around economic development in Australia. So yes, there are some broad trends, and we've outlined them today, but also there's all those fine details. I'm always struck by the fact when you talk to businesses, for any individual business, often the difference between growth and not growth is actually quite a fine margin. And if you think about mid-sized towns, it's exactly the same. Often the difference between growth and not growth is a relatively fine margin. It could be the presence or absence of a general practitioner, for example, affecting travel behaviours. It could be the history of that place. It could be relative location to some other centre which is also growing at the same time. So there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to shape growth. And really, economic development practitioners like Susie, working on the ground, are best placed to understand how they're going to be used to the best advantage.
Can I pick that point up a bit? I was going to ask you both, because you both have a lot of experience in this field, and start with you, Susie. What advice would you give? What lessons have you learned about how to sort of kick off and how to sort of build on what might be a rather sort of tentative interest in perhaps collaborating and working together? Because this seems to be the nucleus of any sort of successful local specialisation program, seems to be getting a willingness for people to work together. Have you got any lessons learned or any suggestions for people who are starting to think about, I need to do this in my place, but where do I start? What would you suggest? And I might ask you, Andrew, to follow up.
It's always a difficult one, isn't it? But crisis is always the main fear. Is a great motivator for many. And, when you've got different businesses that have been there for 65 years and 60 years, which is Temco and Rio, and they might close, the fear and the complacency that you've had, because you might have had an agreement for 30 odd years with that particular business, and all of a sudden it might be gone. And what are you left with, and what do you do? Interestingly enough, though, a lot of those businesses that I work with have actually started around the same time as well. So they've built their own relationships together, and that, I guess, they'd built some level of trust with each other, but they still were a little bit guarded, and they just needed that, I guess, third party to come in and build those relationships and know that they could be really honest with me about their business, and I wasn't going to share it with the person next door, what their annual turnover and what they charge out rate at that for labour hire was, etc., etc. But then some of them end up doing that anyway. But it's about relationship building. There are no shortcuts, I'll give you that. You have to put the hard work in. You have to do it face to face. Very, very difficult to make relationships happen. I quite easily can pick up the phone now because I've got 3-year relationships with these guys, and they trust what I do. But it's also about delivering, so that so many times you cannot and you will not get another chance with industry if you do not do what you say you're going to do. Yeah. So if you want low-hanging fruit, you find the quick wins, you build the the trust from there, and you deliver what you say you're going to deliver.
Yeah, great suggestion. Andrew, what have you seen? Any suggestions from you?
Yeah, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, Kim, and disagree with Susie in one respect, and that is I don't necessarily think a crisis is always the trigger for coming together and working to a better future. I've seen too many examples of where there's been a crisis and places have just failed. Yeah. So Whyalla, for example, used to be South Australia's second largest city, have a population around 28,000, 30,000 people. It's now down to around 20 and have one crisis after another. They haven't always, the crises haven't necessarily resulted in good outcomes.
Yeah. So
I don't think crisis is the key. I think what's really important is a shared vision. And I think Susie sort of touched on that in her opening remarks in her presentation, where she said Rio Tinto might have been about to walk out the door and someone, the CEO, had a vision about, well, what has been our legacy, and had a vision about creating a legacy. And obviously other people came together. Sometimes the crisis makes that conversation a bit easier, but I don't think the crisis itself actually is a trigger or a pathway to success. I think the conversation is, the shared vision is, and that's where the journey starts. And then after that, you have to do the hard work and walk the talk.
And I think what we've both seen is, picking up those early wins and using those as a platform for building further trust. And both of you have said very clearly it's got to be industry led. And what I like about Susie's early examples was it was all about things that were going to give a practical return to those members who are stumping up money very quickly. Now, I'd like to ask Andy Bray, are you there? A question, very interesting one, applying these same sort of thoughts to a new sort of investment opportunity for regions, which is around renewable energy zones. Andy, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, in a way, this is, follows on from the last one, which was that a crisis can be a great motivator. In this case, it's a real opportunity, I think, in that a number of renewable energy zones, in fact 35, are planned for regions up and down the eastern seaboard. And 3 of those were just announced in New South Wales last week. And each of those ones will bring, what you could call an energy specialisation to those towns, similar to the one that Andrew described around Whyalla. But for some of them, they're not heavy industry towns.
What up?
Um,
Same shit, different day.
Check when your mic's still on.
Lol.
And then I put that photo up of my.
Oh, too good. Yeah, sorry. So I was just getting to the question part of it. So I wonder, Andrew, could you reflect on how towns that don't have, those heavy manufacturing complementary industries might be able to make the most out of those kind of situations?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question, Andy. Look, you mentioned 35 locations up and down the eastern seaboard. I know Western Australia has gone heavily into hydrogen as well. I think Whyalla is getting into hydrogen, and the South Australian government's got a hydrogen strategy. I guess that does tell us that it's going to be a very competitive space. Maybe when the product comes to market, there won't be a competition for the product because, of course, global demand for energy is so large. But there may be a competition for investment. So I think one of the issues will be not all of those 35 or 55 or 85 potential sites will develop. If they want to be successful, I think they need to acknowledge the sort of challenges we've been talking about today, and they need to be thinking about how they can develop their distinctive natural assets. So one site might have the best port, for example. Another site might have access to, let's say, virgin water, which might have an advantage in terms of production costs. Another site might have a cheaper price for electricity, or might be able to source all the electricity from renewable sources and therefore have a marketing advantage into some global markets. They're going to have to think about these issues, and they're going to have to think about the labour workforce issues. So I think this will be one of those areas where the successful places will probably both will have a first mover advantage, and there'll be also places that act with speed but not haste. So they get their planning processes, they get their industry engagement, they get their community engagement processes all lined up to ensure success, and they do that as deliberately and as quickly as possible, because it will be a bit of a race, I think.
Susie, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're very much placing ourselves in that competitive market, and as Andrew, Bell Bay has the port, it has the electricity, it has the fresh water, it has the road infrastructure there ready to go, and for other places it's totally green. You know, other places will also have green, but will they have enough fresh water is the question. Tassie has the fresh water to be able to do that, which again will drive production costs down about 15% compared to others that may have to use seawater and desalinate it. So it's around placing yourself with the infrastructure that's needed, and that's why I think Tassie is getting a lot of investment interest from very large companies wanting to set up the hydrogen here.
Thank you, Susie. And look, thanks to all of you for other questions. We're running a bit short on time now. We have had other questions around the need for sort of integrated regional strategic thinking, getting planning right, for instance, to enable new industries to grow. And another question about workforce attraction and the issues around spousal employment and diversification of employment opportunities as a catalyst for bringing in and keeping those specialist skills. But we haven't really got time to follow those on in the open session today, but please do keep engaging the conversation through social media. Thanks again to both of our presenters, Susie and Andrew, for a very, very informative and entertaining presentations. I think we've got a really good view of not just what the research tells us, but how some of these issues play out on the ground too. Now, there's no need to close Zoom. We're about to take a short break. We'll come back we need to be ready to go at 12:50 for our session. So we're going to have a short tea break, have a stretch, move around a bit, get a hot beverage, and we'll come back here in about 5-10 minutes for the second half of our summit finale. We'll hear from Minister Colton and David Robertson and Gavin Williams from NBN. In the meantime, and CEO Liz Ritchie will be convening the next session, and we'll be starting, Nina, in about 10 minutes time, I reckon. So in the meantime, please keep the tweets coming and keep the chat flowing. You can answer, of course, and respond to each other's questions on the chat as well, if you'd like to. And I think Nina's put some links up on the website, both to Andrew's paper and to the summary that we've done. And we'll also put, I think, a link up to Susie's presentation, won't we, as well, for those that are interested. So thanks very much for what I've found a very enjoyable first session. And I look forward to seeing you again shortly, not from this seat, from another seat. I'll be dialing in as a participant for session 2 in about 10 minutes' time.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Liz Ritchie, and I have the pleasure of being the CEO of the Regional Australia Institute. I'm also delighted to be your host for today's second panel session on the theme of regions doubling down or diversifying. I'd like to also again thank and acknowledge the Regions Rising series partner, Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, and the Community Enterprise Foundation arm. Their sponsorship of this series is so important and has enabled us to roll out Regions Rising throughout 2020 to be inclusive and accessible on this free platform. So we're incredibly grateful to our partners, and we've worked with Bendigo and Adelaide Bank for some time, and we know we will continue to into the future. So thank you very, very much for your support. Can I also add to Kim's comments this morning about ensuring that our participants are actively engaging with our social media platform, #Regions Rising. This is, of course, our last session for 2020. And indeed, we have launched that new report today, which is particularly pertinent to regional practitioners and regional leaders right around the country. I hope that you've all enjoyed this morning's session and that you have just taken an important and probably well-needed tea break as we prepare for the second session. I certainly enjoyed hearing from our panellists this morning, Professor Andrew Beer and Susie Bauer, and I thank my colleague Kim Horton, our Chief Economist, for chairing and facilitating that session so beautifully. I think it was wonderful to hear about how the report and the knowledge within pertains to regional leaders and how they can start to plan for their own futures as we all consider the difficult economic environment that we currently face. But I would like to begin our session by acknowledging our very special panellists who are joining us here today. Of course, the Honourable Mark Colton is going to be our first speaker. He is, of course, the Minister for Regional Health, Regional Communications and Local Government. In addition, I also have David Robertson from Bendigo and Adelaide Bank joining us, and indeed Gavin Williams from MB & Co. All of whom I'll be introducing a little later after a few introductory comments. I would also like to warmly acknowledge and welcome a Senator for New South Wales, Perrin Davey, who is joining us today on the webinar, but is also a friend who's based in my hometown of Deniliquin. So it's wonderful to have Perrin joining us today for today's important Regions Rising webinar. Thank you, Perrin. So understanding the benefits of specialisation or diversification, as we've heard this morning, is a very important topic and one that has been stress tested in over the last 12 months with COVID. So before I move into, I guess, our second panel, I thought that it was timely as the CEO of the Institute to join some of the dots, so to speak, with today's report and indeed the Institute's current agenda that we have rolling out over the next few years. Regionalisation has been a key focus for the Institute since our inception, but over, in particular, the last couple of years, I guess we've lifted our ambition to expand our strategic direction and focus on regionalisation. We've been heavily focused on, I guess, 3 macroeconomic issues, looking at jobs, job vacancies and employment, filling and skilling, population and indeed livability. And I wanted to just take a moment to hark back to the report that we launched in August 2019 called Regional Population Growth, Are We Ready? This report, I guess, looked at the population trajectory over the next 30 years and quickly identified that without an intervention, we were going to be in a place where our population was dominated in 4 capital cities. So one of our #1 recommendations within this report was to launch a new national awareness campaign that would indeed promote the opportunities that we all know as regional leaders and champions exist in regional Australia, and to promote furthermore the chances to live, work and invest in the regions. For over 12 months, we have advocated on behalf of regional Australia, and of course in the latest federal budget, our ambition came to reality, receiving some very much needed funding from the federal government to undertake this national awareness campaign. So we very much wanted to share that news with all of you as our regional stakeholders and friends, so that you know this is happening and that we'll be rolling this out through the course of the next 2 years. We know that the National Awareness Campaign will not only promote brand regional, but it will enable us to have an anchor point to promote what we all know and love about regional Australia. I guess the linkage between this report and the regionalisation ambition is that we work regularly with regional councils, RDAs and leaders right around the country to help them understand their own strengths and weaknesses. And today's paper outlines the significance of playing to your region's strengths and really understanding that. Equally, I think the paper also drew on understanding depending on the size of your town, that there may be a different course of action required, and that may lead to further diversification or specialisation, but understanding that is critically important. And I can see Mark joining us here in the background. Hi, Mark. So again, in 2019, I think it's important to just reflect on the fact that we held our first Regions Rising Summit, which was very well attended from, again, I'm sure people on this webinar and regional leaders around the country. We held our very first policy hack session, and we heard very loud and clear at that session that regional people were looking for a new narrative, a more positive narrative that better reflected what we know about regional Australia. And they very much told us that they wanted to grow. So I guess, in short, the RAI listened, and the new campaign will indeed help promote a positive image for our regions, as well as importantly identifying and promoting the employment opportunities, the affordability opportunities, and indeed the livability that we know exists. To help us with this work, just last month, we were delighted to have the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Michael McCormack, launch a new body that will support us called the Regional Activators Alliance. And this alliance has been formed to help the RAI and to also co-create the campaign. Because what we know is that promoting regional Australia is very much a shared responsibility, and that we all have an important role to play. Today, we're lucky to have 40 activators who are working with us and thinking deeply about what each of them can be doing to support their own regional, social and economic growth. So it's reports like this from our research partners, and I thank Andrew Beer and his team again for providing the building blocks for our institute to enable us to continue to play that leading role in thinking and shaping our regional future. So I think this might be a nice segue into our second panel. We've got Mark on standby here We've got three incredible panelists joining us. As I said, they'll be drawing on some of the findings in today's report that are relevant, but also talking about some very important programs. And I think Minister Colton has a new announcement for us here today. We'll also be hearing about how, from David, how we're tracking currently in our bid to come through this recession and recover as quickly as we can. What are the current priorities that we're looking at, and what impact did the federal budget have to aid that recovery? So all of these elements are important as we try to navigate the road ahead and embark on a better future here in the region. So look, I'd like to now welcome our first speaker, Minister Mark Colton. And I'll just provide a very brief introduction. I know Mark's well known to all of you, and certainly a great friend to the RAI, and has already joined us on Regions Rising this year. So we feel very privileged and honoured to have him back on the panel today. But just briefly, Mark was, of course, first elected to the House of Representatives for the seat of Parkes in New South Wales in 2007, and he has since been re-elected numerous times. And earlier this year was sworn in, as I said earlier, the Minister for Regional Health, Regional Communications and Local Government. So please join me in welcoming Minister Colton. Hello.
Okay, thanks. I've neglected to turn my phone off, please. Everyone's ringing. I think my nephew wants to borrow the tractor or something. Hey, look, it's great to be with you. I'm actually with Senator Perrin Davey today, Senator for New South Wales. We're in Tumut, which I've got to say is a beautiful part of New South Wales. And we were here for a couple of reasons today. One was to launch one of the innovative models we have for delivering primary health services, one of 5 trials that we funded in the budget. And the one we looked at today was called the Snowy Fields site, which is a regional partnership between Tumut and the surrounding small towns of Adelong, Tumbarumba and Batlow. So excited for that, and also here for another exciting announcement, which was the launch today of round 5A of the mobile phone black spot program. And so most of your viewers would be aware that in 2013 the coalition government set up a mobile phone black spot program. We've funded about 1,250 odd towers, and I think there's about 850 of those operational, and the others are still under construction. But we got to a point in round 5 where the telcos basically said, look, the model that you've been putting up is not suitable anymore, and and so we ended up with only half a subscription of the round. And so while the telcos were showing some reluctance under that model to go in and deliver communications, mobile communications, to the 100,000 people or roughly around Australia that don't have it, certainly we're not prepared to give up on that. And so round 5A is, I guess, an in-between round where we're looking at 3 different things. We're looking at covering important highway transport routes, making sure that we've got connectivity along those. We're looking at some more resilience in disaster-prone areas, and so that can be fire, flood, or cyclone, and that follows on with the 37 million that we announced last month for bushfire resilience programs. And but the exciting part around 5A is the innovation package, and so what I'm really focused on is delivering that higher level of service to the people that need it the most. And so we are funding models of delivery that are innovative, that might be new technology, they might be partnerships between local communities and telcos, they might be partnerships between sort of business hubs and telcos. And it's opened up now for 12 weeks. The successful applicants for this round will form the basis of the guidelines for round 6. So round 6 is already funded for next year, but the guidelines aren't drawn up. And so we are looking at innovative ways to make sure that we can fill in those hard to fill gaps. And so Gavin Williams, I think, is on the line, Liz, a bit later on, who will talk about the NBN Co and their upgrade into regional areas as well. So I won't go over that, but sort of back to where we started. I think, while COVID-19 has presented enormous challenges for Australia, it's actually, I believe, presented a great opportunity for regional Australia. And your report has shown that the strength of regional Australia is that they are individual communities with strengths that are really pertaining to their own communities and regions. And so the idea of growing on those strengths is incredibly important. And what makes the difference now is we've got a captive audience. So those people that might normally take the family to New Zealand for Christmas or go to Bali or even Europe, they're now looking across regional Australia to have an experience. Our challenge is to actually seal the deal on what was a very enjoyable and successful visit into someone actually thinking about maybe relocating. And I know the Arana RDA in Dubbo are putting flyers in the motels saying, are you enjoying your visit to Dubbo? I know this is great, but do you know that a house in Dubbo costs this? Do you know that there are jobs, in the legal profession, in the medical profession, in the education profession, in the council looking for engineers and town planners right across? And so do you know that these businesses are for sale? You could own them. And so what we need to do now is really seal the deal on people not just having a good experience in the regions, but actually committing and relocating. And so connectivity is such an important part of that. I've got to say, the NBN has held up much better than I think people expected. If I was brutally honest, probably better than I was fearing. And I think, apart from a few hiccups, people have managed to work quite well remotely. As I might have said, I think in a previous hookup with you, I worked at home for weeks in Warialda on a satellite connection. So when I'm at home, all my voice calls go through my iPhone on the satellite connection, Zoom, all my emails, everything is done via the satellite. So if I can do that at Warialda, you should be able to do that anywhere. And so we've found that you can be connected to the rest of the world, not only just the capital cities. And so what people are realising is that, in dollars and cents terms, regional Australia has been a smart investment. I would rather own a bit of land in regional Australia than an office block in Sydney at the moment, quite frankly. Apologies to anyone that owns an office block in Sydney that's on the line, but we've shown that not only sometimes, Liz, we talk about lifestyle, and I think we make a mistake. We talk about farming as a lifestyle, and we come up with these romantic stories we tell about ourselves. And quite frankly, when things get tough, we go the other way. And we go out and we tell these terrible stories of woe and poverty and destruction and death and lack of water and all these other things that scare people off. And so now we've got a bit of a break. We've got largely pretty good seasonal conditions across the regions. We've got a captive audience of people from the city that are looking for somewhere to go. But we've also got investors that are looking to go and invest in a dollar. And I know real estate agents that I speak to are having unprecedented interest. And with other projects on, like the Inland Rail, places, like Narrabri, Moree, Narromine, Parks, right across New South Wales, but obviously right through into Queensland to Toowoomba and beyond. There's a huge interest at the moment of not only relocating because of opportunities during construction, and quite frankly, it'll take 16,000 jobs to construct this line. And in the last bit we've just finished, Parks to Narromine, nearly 1,000 people, I think, and 80% of those people live within 90 kilometres of the job. So it's been a huge boost to regional businesses. And so I think, the round that we've just announced on Black Spot is a step forward. That builds on the regional connectivity program. So we'd allocated 53 million to that. In the budget, we topped it up by another 30 million, and applications for that closed on the 17th of November last week. And so what we, well, that might be today, actually, I think. It is. And so the regional connectivity program is once again looking for partnerships, innovation, and funding what future telecommunications might look like. And there's even a possibility in there of stationary balloons, seeing what low orbiting satellites can mean, a whole range of other things, as well as what a combined tower on the edge of an industrial area might mean with a telco in an internet provider, where those businesses that need more than what we can offer under the NBN can connect. And so well done, Liz, to you and the team at the RAI. I think you're doing a sterling job giving that message as a positive message. Regional Australia should not be feared and pitied. Seriously, the days of sending food parcels and second-hand clothes to the people of the bush has got to stop. And we've got to start getting people coming to the region with their accountants and their solicitors, working out how they can take advantage of what we have to offer. And so we need to provide those services: telecommunications, health, and education. They're the three that seal the deal on making sure that people feel comfortable relocating. So well done. I'm not sure. I think I'll go back to you now.
Yes.
Perrin's been with me today, and so if there's any questions to Perrin, she'd be gladly take them on as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, we're going to hear from our other panelists and then come back to a facilitated session at the end, Minister. But thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words. And Perrin, lovely to see you there with the Minister. Apologies. I thought you were in gorgeous Denny today, so it's good to see you there with the Minister. Of course, Minister, we couldn't agree with you more. I guess we're incredibly focused here at the Institute to ensure that we speak from a place of strength, and that the days of talking regions down, talking about the deficit issues that regional Australia has had is not a place that we want to be. And certainly what we've seen both coming through in our recent reports from the big movers and more recently from the banks and core logic data, we're seeing enormous amount of data that's indicating that the movement is happening. And we're incredibly proud here at the Institute to be leading that movement. As I said in my opening remarks, the strategy of regionalisation is live and well, and securing that investment from the federal government in the latest budget was so important to us as a charity and a not-for-profit organisation who represents the regions, to roll out this national awareness campaign, which will be the first of its kind. So you'll be seeing and hearing a lot more about this over the coming years, and we thank you and we thank the federal government. So to our next panellist, David Robinson. David, again, just a brief introduction. Wonderful to have you with us today, representing the Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, who are of course our national sponsors on Regions Rising series. David joined Bendigo Bank 19 years ago as a head of financial markets, and today is the head of economic and market research for the bank. So we're absolutely delighted to have you with us, and we welcome you here to today's panel. Over to you, David. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for that introduction, Liz, and good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to join you all for this webinar event, and Bendigo Bank is thrilled to partner with the Regional Australia Institute in this series. So thanks for the invitation extended to me to provide a short update on our view on the economy, both nationally and from a regional perspective, but more importantly, to make some observations and suggestions about where the economy might be heading in a post-pandemic world, when the topics that we've been talking about today, so manufacturing and diversification for regional Australia, digital connectivity and technology, they'll be so important in shaping a sustainable economic recovery, especially in a post-pandemic world. So look, I'll share my screen now to run through some slides to outline our view on where we are and where we're heading. So bear with me for one moment. Hopefully that comes up on the screen now. Look, obviously we've all just been through the largest global recession in 90 years. It's been the largest economic contraction in Australia in living memory, but nevertheless, there are some, I think there's been some progress in particular over the last month or two that shouldn't be ignored. And so I do want to extend some very cautious optimism about how that might pan out going through to 2021 and beyond. And so look, just to kick things off, to quantify the impact of the pandemic on our economy, I think the best barometers are jobs and GDP growth. And this chart shows the Reserve Bank's estimates of where growth is heading. In fact, this is their view back in May on how deep the recession might have been, when their best guess initially was a 10% hit to GDP, also 10% hit to jobs and to wages. And so the pink line in this chart shows their first blush attempt of guessing where or estimating where this would all head. And you'll note that that didn't have a return to pre-pandemic GDP until about 2022. But sensibly, the Reserve Bank added a couple of upside and downside scenarios to cater for the wide range of uncertain factors that might ultimately drive the economy. And then 3 months later, you'll see that the economy actually only contracted a fraction over 7%, not 10%. I shouldn't say only, because it's been the largest recession since probably the 1930s. But the new baseline in pink there was shallower, still not fully recovering nationally until 2022. And that's partly been due to the impact of the second wave of COVID-19 in Victoria. But the two-speed economy did make these projections even more complicated. So still the dotted lines there showing some upside and downside scenarios. But fast forward another 3 months to November, so basically the forecasts as of today, and you can see that the baseline there in pink is actually pretty close to the original upside scenario. So it is possible to have upside surprises in a global pandemic. And similarly for unemployment, the initial forecast was for it to hit 10%. That's actually improved to 8%, and I suspect even that may be on the conservative side. But when we think about this 7% contraction to the economy, a massive hit to jobs and to economic growth as we all experienced, but in the end, actually only a handful of comparable countries around the world coped better than Australia did. And I think that does show the success of the policy measures, whether or not it's health policy to contain the virus, fiscal and monetary policy, managing the necessary shutdown of the economy, and then building a bridge to the post-pandemic world. So where to from here? Should we be leaning towards the upside or the downside? And as it happens, the announcements we've seen through October and November, a number of them I think do lean to the upside. And to list a couple there, I think further good news on the vaccine front would help in that respect. It's certainly been very good news over the last couple of weeks. And I think we get the AstraZeneca trial results out over the next few days. So hopefully that keeps building. The ability to reopen our domestic borders is just so vital, not just reopen them, but to keep them open. And then there's the way we respond to the monetary and fiscal stimulus measures that have been put in place, which are really incentives. And I'll come back to that point in just a moment. But as it happens, all three of those factors, I think, have been encouraging over the last 6 weeks in particular. But it's not a done deal. A downside scenario could emerge, say, if the vaccine news disappoints. There could be further setbacks such as fresh outbreaks, and we've seen the sort of hotspot there in Adelaide. So hopefully that gets contained very quickly and doesn't limit the ability to keep borders open. There could be escalations of trade tensions with key partners. So, I think the downside scenario, we don't need to, I can't underestimate that. And we do have the reality of precious little international tourism for some time. Net migration will probably be very low this year, and so population growth is something I want to cover off as well. But overall, the post-pandemic economy, once we get past a viable vaccine, may well follow that upside scenario. What I would call the COVID-safe economy that we're in now is going to be a little more subdued. But look, just to cover off on the likelihood that we're all going to respond positively to the fiscal support, and there's been no shortage of it. Initially, JobKeeper, JobSeeker, Home Builder, and so on. There's been an impressive array of support packages which have been pretty successful, I'd say. And that was all built upon with the federal budget, with an incredible 11% of GDP worth of spending. So over $200 billion worth of commitments there, which is a record peacetime deficit. Absolutely the right time to support our economy from a once in a century shock. I assume that's the right frequency going forward. But, if you're concerned about the size of that deficit, the two comments I'd make are, firstly, the green lines there show the cyclical nature of budget surpluses and deficits. And I thought it was really important and to be applauded, the federal government's commitment to keep fiscal stimulus coming and not to return to budget repair until the economy is back on track, with the unemployment rate perhaps back closer to 5% nationally. And the other observation I'd make is, if you're worried about the level of government debt that is going to come from all of these support measures, I think it's worth noting that because interest rates are not just at record lows, but pretty close to zero in terms of government borrowing money in wholesale markets, helped by quantitative easing, the actual interest bill on all this debt is moving lower over the next couple of years, both from where it's been over the last few years and a lot lower as a percentage of GDP compared to where we were in the mid-90s, coping with the recovery from the 91 recession, which was a very slow process. So, I'm certainly not concerned at all about the debt levels in terms of government debt, in particular being a AAA rated sovereign entity. Again, the support measures in many respects are incentives. The tax cuts are incentives for households to spend. Businesses have incentives to invest and to hire through instant asset write-off and through the wage subsidies. So I think we do need to address the question, will we all take the bait, both on a household and a business level? And our bank undertook a survey of our customer base through our My Voice survey, where, amongst a range of other questions, we asked households, what do you expect to do with the extra money that's coming from tax cuts and from other federal budget measures? And it was interesting to see the responses. It was a pretty good sample size, over 1,500 responses, and almost exactly half from regional and remote locations and half from urban locations. But around about 20% said they would spend the money. Around about a third said they would save it. Another 20% pay down debt, and about a quarter paying some bills. And the data, regional versus urban, was fairly similar or fairly evenly distributed, although regional customers were, those surveyed from regional locations were more likely to pay bills and less likely to save the tax cuts. So look, you might look at that, that 19% savings rate and wonder if that's enough of a kickstart to the economy. But I think it is worth noting that money saved or money paying down debt is improving household balance sheets, which is always a healthy thing, and also paying bills, which is around about a quarter of the respondents, those bills would have had to have been paid, so that would probably have come from debt or disposable income anyway. So, if you combine those thoughts with the latest strong retail numbers we've been seeing on a national basis, and also the pickup in consumer confidence, which is actually up to a 3.5-year high, I do think that household spending will continue to pick up and respond to the stimulus measures. And similarly, business confidence in the latest survey is up to an 18-month high. So I'm fairly hopeful that the massive budget spending will complement other support measures and will help to drive household activity as well as business activity, especially in the post-pandemic economy after a viable vaccine is rolled out. Look, the last point I wanted to make is on the topic of population growth, which we've already called out is moving in the right direction from a regional perspective. And nationally, I think the lack of net migration and slower population growth for the next year or two is a challenge. But it's more so a challenge, I think, for the larger capital cities. Look, we've seen 1.5 to 2% population growth nationally for over a decade now. In the federal budget, they've got a forecast of population growth going down to, I think, only 0.2% for this year, then very slowly recovering back up to about 1.5% by 2022. But I do think, having suppressed COVID-19, and pretty much all those cases are in capitals, not in regional Australia, aren't they? That's certainly going to help how quickly we can join travel bubbles and return to trend population growth. But more importantly, from a regional perspective, and we together with the RAR and others have been arguing for some time that having 40% of Australia's population in 2 capital cities is a barrier to Australia reaching its full productive potential. But as this chart shows, and my apologies to the top half of Australia, it didn't quite fit in. That was just a formatting issue I had. But there's some wonderful rich data that you can access through the ABS website here. But what that does show is just the opportunity for further decentralisation and for a better distribution of the population growth. So we continue to advocate for policies, as we've just heard from the Minister, to encourage greater population growth in regional Australia, infrastructure investment, soft infrastructure, healthcare, education, and in particular enabling the regions via technology. Again, as we've just heard from the Minister on digital technology and comms. So, a range of incentives to help people to live and work and innovate beyond the capital cities to help even up this map a bit. And look, just on the population growth rate by region, it's shown in the chart. Again, this is for last year. In red is 2% population growth plus, orange for 1 to 2%. And I think they should be the sort of aspirations we have quite broadly. And that was making progress ahead of COVID-19. But since March, we've actually seen a sharp rise in demand for regional property through our branch network and through anecdotal evidence through the network, and also through property prices, which I know we've already touched on a little bit. But at the same time, through COVID-19, that the average dwelling price in Melbourne has fallen 5%, and Sydney probably about 3.5%. There's actually been a year-on-year and a 6-monthly rise in prices in regional locations, and the volumes back that up. So look, I'm pretty confident that regional population growth, demand for property will continue, not just through the COVID period, but beyond. And a lot of that is assisted by technology, enabling us to work and run businesses wherever we want to, not just near crowded capital cities. So the discussion on digital technology is right on cue, and that's certainly going to help GDP and jobs growth to be more sustainable and better distributed, and will build resilience for future shocks. So look, in conclusion, on the raw numbers, as an economist, I can't resist the opportunity to give a prediction or two. Nationally, the economy contracted about 7.25% in the first half of the year, should be rebounding probably about 3.5% in the second half of the year that we're in now, and then between about 3 to 5% next year. and that's subject to some of the variables that we've already touched on in those upside downside scenarios. Unemployment nationally has probably already peaked at about 7.5%, but will remain elevated in this COVID safe period ahead of what should be a stronger recovery in the post-pandemic world, and regional Australia should continue to see that strong demand for property. And again, the Minister touched on tourism, the fact that we'll be doing domestic tourism, not international, and typically Australians like to do that in the regions. So look, thanks again for the opportunity to share those brief thoughts on the path ahead. Some very cautious optimism, so always good to have a disclaimer when I've got that. But as we've seen, not all the surprises are going to be on the downside, and we can certainly put the odds in our favour by building the productive capacity of the nation, a good portion of which will be lying in regional Australia. So thanks again, Liz, and I'll unshare the screen and look forward to Q&A.
Thank you, David. Such an interesting presentation there, and I know I've got a number of questions to come back to you with in our Q&A facilitated session, but it was a lovely segue to our third presenter, Gavin Williams, who I know is on the road and joining us here. Here's Gavin, welcome to you today.
Thanks, Liz.
Good to see you. So look, just very briefly, again, a formal introduction to Gavin. He was appointed to the Chief Development Officer of Regional and Remote in October 2019, bringing more than 5 years experience with NBN Co, but 25 years experience in the telecommunication industry. Gavin and the team at NBN Co have also been long-term partners of the RAI, so we're absolutely delighted to have you with us today. So over to you, Gavin.
Thanks, Liz. And yeah, 25 years in the industry. It's actually more than that, but I think it makes you sound much older if you said 30 plus years in the industry. I'm actually coming to you from Tower Block in North Sydney. So as the Minister said, he'd much rather be in regional Australia, so would I, but off to Bathurst and Orange tomorrow, can't wait. Perhaps segueing from some of the comments that have been made, yeah, for sure, COVID has really accelerated some of the trends that we'd all, kind of predicted over multiple years, just happening in a matter of months. Things like telehealth, online shopping, skills training, video conferencing your mum rather than picking up the phone, and of course studying from home and very importantly working from home. NBN did a survey a few months ago that showed that 81% of people changed the way that they thought about work-life balance, and 67% thought that they'd work more from home. Next week, in fact, we're going to be releasing a major survey around attitudes around flexible working, and it'll show, I think, that COVID-19 has really opened people's eyes. And then just as a sneak peek, the survey will show that 47% of folks surveyed have been thinking about relocation, but now with the lived experience through COVID, something that previously didn't seem feasible is now feasible. So that's a marvellous thing. You talk, Liz, and the RAA have long advocated for a multifaceted range of imperatives really that need to land to make regional Australia a really fully fledged foundational opportunity for the country and a decentralised workforce. Livability is one key thing, and competitive infrastructure for businesses is another, and the Minister touched on that as well. So a few updates from NBN over the last little while. We've learned from COVID, and we've identified opportunities with low interest rates and opportunity to pump prime evolution of our business. And we announced recently a very ambitious program to upgrade part of our networks to push fibre deeper, $4.5 billion program, and about a half of the upgrade, in fact, is going to be into regional Australia. And matter of fact, as part of our broader operating plan and business plan, We'll be investing over $2 billion in regional Australia in several areas. That includes the upgrade of fibre to the node to fibre to the premises on demand, and about 1 million premises in regional Australia there. Part of our baseline program includes significant sums in the upgrade of fixed wireless capacity over years. We've also announced a $300 million co-investment fund so that we can work with councils and state governments and the Commonwealth to further grow our fibre infrastructure and push fibre deeper into regional Australia. And very importantly, part of a $700 million package of business fibre zones, which is really the single-minded message I'd like to impart in my few minutes here. Before I do, if you can go to the next slide, just another update, and I think an important role for NBN. Looking at the impacts of Black Summer, the devastation across vast swathes of Australia, but not least in the southeast of New South Wales, we identified an opportunity to provide a more permanent presence to support bushfire recovery in that area. And we launched a couple of weeks ago NBN's first community hub in regional Australia. We've got our staff out the front there. So it'll support in the near term, it's a great opportunity for local residents and businesses in the region to help them recover and operate as a relief centre for bushfires. But our hope is that over time, in fact, this will serve as an innovation hub for local businesses. And it'll also inform us on ways that we can build or partner with other entities across the country to support innovation in regional Australia. Perhaps if we jump 2 slides on, please, to the business fibre zone. Next slide. Just in the interest of time. So, sorry, back one. Just so, what are business fibre zones? There is no business that I've spoken to that is not going through a digital transformation. Everybody is, whether it's a traditional, what you might think is a traditional manufacturing business like building agricultural equipment, through to professional services and conveyancing. Agricultural equipment manufacturers are using computer-aided design and needing to upload designs in the cloud. Conveyancers are needing to, just about all conveyancing's online. The digital transformation is upon the length and breadth of enterprises. The sorts of broadband services that you use at home have a bias for speed coming down. This is you watching Netflix or ABC iView at night, and less emphasis on speed going up to support cloud applications and file storage and backup, online processes and collaboration such as we're doing now. There are products that enterprises and businesses have available in capital cities that enable them to have better access to those uplink speeds, symmetrical speeds, as fast down as up. And it's that uplink speed that really powers business. Enterprise Ethernet is our wholesale product that is designed ground up to support business and enterprise, from anywhere from 10 megabits per second through to nearly a gigabit per second. In the past, businesses in regional Australia may not have been able to access these kinds of services. In the past, if they did have access to these services, they may have had to pay thousands of dollars to connect their business to fibre. If they could connect, traditionally the industry's had a zoning structure such that if you're in regional Australia, you're paying more than you would be than if you're in the middle of Pitt Street. So what business fibre zones have done is there's 240 of them across the country, 85 in regional Australia. If you're a business within these business fibre zones, you can access a $0 build for NBN to connect the business. And the monthly charge that you spend, we've taken out the zoning. So you'd be spending as much in Bunbury, Bendigo, Bundaberg, Ballina, Burnie, or Murray Bridge. And Murray Bridge was the only regional town in South Australia that's as close as I got to a B. You'd be paying as much as you would in the same amount as you would in the CBD of Adelaide, Brisbane, Perth, Sydney. So that has the implication of up to 67% discount at a wholesale level off what they otherwise would have been spending prior to this release in the end of September. So it's all about enabling globally competitive regional towns and cities. So we're delighted with the range of business fibre zones that we've released so far, 85 in regional Australia, but there are more towns and cities than that. So we've also introduced a $50 million fund to co-invest with local councils and states to expand our business fibre zones, create more and expand them. And this isn't just in the CBD of Port Macquarie. You'll find if you look at it, there's swathes of our regional towns and cities that are covered with business fibre zones. So that was really the single-minded message. If I was going to leave anything, is we need to support infrastructure that supports livability for people that want to move to the bush. But it's very important to support infrastructure, to enable our businesses, all of which are going through technological transformation, to enable them to compete globally in the digital economy. So you can find out more information, nbn.com.au/business fibre, and find out how NBN is pushing fibre deeper and supporting, as I said, globally competitive regional businesses. Liz.
Sorry, everyone. Thanks, Nina. So thank you, Gavin. Look, three different but related presentations there. And I guess I'd like to go back to Minister Colton's presentation and perhaps draw some threads there back to you, Gavin. Thank you, Minister, for I guess announcing today that the reopening of the Black Mobile Spot campaign, and that applications are open again. You started to list some of the great innovations that you as Minister are hearing around enabling greater digital technology and indeed then further business and economic growth that will be able to occur in and across regional Australia. Are you able to expand a little bit more on any of those, Minister? And perhaps I'll then ask Gavin to jump in and follow suit with any that NBN are seeing across Australia at the moment as well, around those innovative technologies that we're seeing that will help enable this business growth. Minister, to you.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I think we will see, what I'm seeing around now is the increased use of data by some of our traditional industries. And I was at a silo manufacturer in Gunnedah a couple of weeks ago. And of course, they heavily relied on designs and blueprints and things that they're using the network for. But what I'm seeing with some of the innovative ways of delivering this, and I'll use an example in my electorate, Field Solutions Group, who are they're getting some traction now as a substantial player, but they started off in Moree, so they're purchasing into the Transgrid fibre optic cable that goes, the Transgrid used to connect, control their electorate. So they're buying capacity from Transgrid. They're delivering high capacity broadband services. It's not cheap, but it's unlimited data and very high uploads and downloads, and they're bouncing that around the tops of grain silos in the northwest. And so you could be out at Mungandai or Weemallah or Cropper Creek. Apologies to those people that don't know those Blake places. If you don't know where Cropper Creek is, you haven't lived, I've got to say. But those places where traditionally they wouldn't have been able to get that higher capacity. And these are businesses, one of the businesses west of Moree has 30 residences. It's a probably 100,000 acre cotton farm. And so all not only is their business getting that capacity, but all the staff that live on that farm are watching Netflix and everything else at the same time. And so I think that's a sort of an example of what we're looking at, where it's not quite the traditional way of doing things, because regional Australians are very good at gobbling up capacity when it gets invented. And, we're talking about, we've now got GPS guided tractors, which is wonderful. But maybe the upside or the downside is that the operators are generally watching Netflix while they're going up and down on a satellite guided tractor. So when you go to make a phone call, you're competing on that same tower with that data use. And so, we've got to just keep increasing the capacity so that when we think of different ways of using it, it's sitting there.
Thank you. Gavin, over to you.
Yeah, and I just think that there's, kind of alluding to some of the comments the Minister made, the imperative is that parties are able to work together in probably more flexible business models than you might see traditionally, because it's a truism in regional infrastructure that if you go it alone in silos, then it's not going to be as efficient. Metaphorical silos, not literal silos. You're not going to be as efficient as and probably have as good an outcome as if you do combines. Hence, we'd be interested in exploring synergetic opportunities with mobile black spots and working with other parties, such as the Minister raised, using enabling us to mutually benefit from respective assets. And just the only other thing to add is the question was around other interesting examples. I mean, there's an imperative to support the growth of digital agriculture, and a lot of telecommunications businesses are tuned to coverage on roads. Well, it's basically coverage where people live. So the NBN traditional model is to get to the farmhouse. Mobile operators' traditional model might be to cover a town for mobility in the road. But a paddock where there's nobody, isn't as great a market. So there's some innovative companies, and I'm thinking of someone like Diversifying and Wagga Wagga, who and there's others looking at how to leave no paddock behind, and that's an area in our ag strategy that we're leaning into as well, to understand how we can support that imperative for the great economic outcome that an opportunity that presents itself there. Liz?
Thanks, Gavin. I might just stay with you for a moment. Obviously, it's been a busy time for NBN, and congratulations on the investment and announcement around the business zone. But also, I really wanted to congratulate you and the team at NBN on the community hub that you've just launched in Batemans Bay, and I know you touched on that. Just share with us how that was received at a community level.
Oh, look, really humbling. I mean, and my concern was we kind of left it too late, but you can't move in the Eurobodella Shire without, finding firsthand people that have been impacted by the bushfires, and recovery is slow. So it's important for all of us to recognise that that nature is service providers. It's something that will take years to recover. So still very relevant in that the role of supporting recovery. The people that have shown interest span from seniors committees that are looking to better engage with digital technology, through to innovative new startups that don't have space for themselves and are looking for support to support that innovation, and local businesses looking for information about how to jump on business fibre zones. So we've been really blown away by the support from council through to community groups on that centre. And to be fair, I think we're still learning together with what the particular right to play is and the role NBN plays in innovation, but something we're committed to for the long haul.
I'm really delighted in that, and obviously we've got David from Bendigo Adelaide Bank and NBN are also members of RAI's Regional Australia Council 2031, and the council was really formed to ensure that corporate Australia was prioritising regional. And examples of I think, the community hub that NBN and regional hub that you've launched is exactly the type of thing that we've been talking about, and that we've certainly been talking to Minister G and the team, his team and the government around understanding and I guess reimagining what the new decentralisation / regionalisation policy may look like for our country moving forward. So I think it's a really great example, and I think we'll start to see a lot more of that across regional Australia. So I really look forward to keeping tabs on its progress, Gavin, with you and the team. But look, we're starting to run short on time, and I'm really want to draw David in here and come full circle. I loved your presentation. Love to see that I guess we've been much closer to the upside data rather than the downside data that you presented. And I think all of us have been humbled by the way that Australia and our leaders, I guess, have navigated Australia's course through COVID. I think you mentioned in your presentation on a global standing, we've stood well and perhaps surprisingly, I guess. David, the question I would say to you as an economist, and I know you would have many economists in your peer group, are you surprised with what you've seen and how Australia has managed to avoid, I guess, worst case scenarios? We heard the Treasurer and the PM at length talking about the unemployment getting above that 10%, and yet I hear from you and others that we're more likely around that 7.5%, and that will reduce quite swiftly. So I'm just interested, as an economist, were you surprised by that? And you mentioned some of the policies that helped get us there, but do you think there are other things that Australia has done that other countries haven't?
Yeah, it's been a pleasant surprise, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And certainly there were a lot of doom and gloom predictions back in April, May, and it was hard not to be gloomy then because it's such a unique event. And the word unprecedented got trotted out quite a lot, but for mine, unique is the best way to describe this. We've never had a situation where we've had to deliberately shut down an economy before, so we didn't know how it would go. And I think my gut instinct was that, well, if you deliberately shut it down and you're able to deliberately reopen it, then that may well be less damaging than a GFC style shock, which was really all about mispricing of assets and so on. But look, it was a pleasant surprise that it's gone as smoothly as it has. And I've already, talked to how the policy response was decisive and effective in Australia, and probably more so than most countries around the world. And you look at the countries that haven't got COVID-19 under control yet, the case numbers in Europe, many parts of the Europe, UK, many parts of North America are continuing to set record highs. And here we are, just trying to manage the odd outbreak. So, we've got good form with coping with crises. We were one of the few countries that didn't go into recession in the GFC. And I think it does help to be a AAA rated country. Outside of Europe, I think there are only 2 AAA rated countries left, us and Singapore. Canada, I think, lost their AAA recently from one of the ratings agencies. So we were in a position of strength going into that crisis and this. I don't know that I want to sound overconfident on the jobs number, in that it's probably peaked at 7.5, and there are uncertain things that could happen, but never. And at the same time, youth unemployment's too high, employment is too high, but nevertheless, I think we've coped from a policy perspective very well. The fact that it was a united policy too, whether we had a national cabinet which brought everyone together. The fact that industry responded, I know through the banks with having sort of deferral of loan repayments, but you can apply that principle to other industries. So it was a we're all in this together moment, and I think that's the way we responded. So let's hope that continues to be a successful policy response.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I was interested in the bank's survey and the differences. I saw the largest difference there between regional, remote and urban around the decisions to save those stimulus incentives. So would that have anything to do with Melbourne's lockdown more predominantly than perhaps where Sydney might be at, or is there any more behind that data you could share with us?
I'm not sure it was, the Melbourne second lockdown may have been a part of that. I suspect it's more to do with I don't want to make a sweeping statement, but it was more to do with an attitudinal difference. Look, I mean, you need to prioritise with this, with these situations, and so it's a case of where the priorities lie. But at the end of the day, irrespective of whether it's spent or saved, it's still good for the economy for future resilience. But you've reminded me that I need to drill down a little bit more state by state rather than just region by region. So why don't I come back to you with some further analysis?
No, that'd be great, David. We always love hearing economic analysis. So thank you very much. Look, we have reached our time at 2 o'clock. So I guess before I make some closing comments, I would just like to warmly thank all of our presenters here for today's session. Minister Colton, thank you for your time, and Perrin, great to have you there as well. David and Gavin, thank you to all of you for being available today and supporting the RAI as you do so frequently. So thank you. It's been a really fascinating session. I hope that those who've joined us today gain insights from today's report. There's much to glean in the 4-pager, but there's also a much deeper report available on our website for those who might like to get into the detail of benefits of specialising or diversifying. So you'll find that on our website. As I said in my opening remarks, this is our last session for Regions Rising 2020. It has been a different year. We had to pivot like many organisations. We were expecting to be rolling Regions Rising around the nation as we did in 2019. But we have been heartened by the response that we have received in our webinar series over the course of this year. We've had I think almost over 4,000, close to 5,000 people participate in the Regions Rising webinar series, which is absolutely incredible. So whilst we couldn't get face-to-face with you all around the country, which we love to do, I think we've more than exceeded our expectations in attendance and engagement throughout 2020. And we hope that as friends of the RAI that you have enjoyed these and that they have provided much needed support and information and connection through what has been a challenging year. And yeah, I guess to use David's line, a once in a century shock that we've all been navigating. Again, we cannot do this without the support of our partners and sponsors. So to Marnie Baker, Managing Director of Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, and to David with us today and the whole team there, thank you so much for supporting Regions Rising and making it freely available to all of RAI's supporters throughout 2020. 2020. We are very busy, not only pulling together the new National Awareness Campaign that I mentioned, but we're also pulling together Regions Rising 21-22 series. It'll be a 2-year series that we take around the country. We've loved bringing you the series online, so we're taking a hybrid series forward into the future. So these webinars will continue to be available forevermore, which is a great outcome for us, and I hope for you as stakeholders. We hope to have more information for you available for the summit, which is at the moment being held in late March 2021, where we'll be launching the national campaign as well. So do stay tuned on all of our social channels. We will be in touch with more information soon. So on that note, once again, thank you for joining us. Good afternoon to you all. I hope you enjoy the remaining part of today, and equally enjoy much needed rest over the festive season. And we look forward to seeing you all again in 2021. Thank you.